Thank you. Can you guys hear me all right? Yeah, right? Okay. My name is Zoe. Thank you again for coming, echoing what Pau said. Special thanks to the jury, of course, for your time and your unpaid labor, which I think will make more sense as a joke after this presentation. So this is the Great American Wage Heist. And I'd like to begin with a question, which is, what do we think of when we think of theft? This has been a guiding question for me since we were given the prompt for this project, because I feel like in popular culture, a lot of the times we're presented with characterizations of theft that are often impersonal, violent, and often random. So what might this look like in our mind? I think maybe this comes to mind: guns, burglaries, holdups, that kind of thing. And in the US, $13.5 billion is stolen in property theft alone each year. But what if I told you that you are way more likely to be robbed by somebody you know very well, your employer? So in the US, almost more than 3 times is stolen by businesses and companies and employers from their employees than is stolen in property theft combined. And in 2019, 4.6 million workers experienced wage theft. And this was a statistic that just blew my mind, because I had never heard of this talked about in newspapers, like nightly news, things like that. And in my research, I found that what's most likely, and why it is that we probably don't hear about this, is because the people most likely to be affected by this are people who earn the lowest incomes and who have the weakest protections under the law. So as I was digging in and developing this story, I really wanted to focus on the fact that this isn't something that just happens to people randomly, that it's a massive systemic failure on behalf of labor rights. So one of my goals was to tackle some very specific questions about what enables wage theft. So first, misleading cultural representations of theft. So are we even looking in the right places? Who are we looking for? What color is their skin? How are they portrayed in media, and how is that making us look for them and seek them out, versus maybe somebody who might not look the way we think they might look, and how they're kind of avoiding the spotlight in that sense. And then second, the lack of awareness about existing rights. So can you fight for your rights if you don't know what they are? I think that's a very important part of the problem, because I think we're all part of the labor market, so it's important to understand what our rights are so that we can know when we're being taken advantage of. And then third, that there are laws protecting businesses over individuals, and I think over the years it's become more of a problem, because there's just loophole after loophole that's allowing companies to get away with essentially stealing from their employees. So for the exhibition, sorry, I keep forgetting I have to speak directly into this. A goal of mine was definitely to talk about more the systemic issues surrounding it, not just that it happens and to what extent. So for the narrative structure, just to give you guys a brief overview, the first touch point that I wanted was to have something very interactive, so asking people who are visiting to participate in the exhibit, putting themselves in the shoes of somebody who engages in waged work. A lot of visitors might themselves participate in waged work, so the interaction was clocking in with a time card, signaling the start of a workday. And the first piece was about wage theft, basically as defined by law. So it is against the law. It's something that happens despite it being against the law. So what are the different types of wage theft? And who are the people that are most affected by these different types? Second, I talk about the minimum wage, because I argue that the minimum wage as is also a form of wage theft, in the fact that it's no longer livable or dignified. And third, I talk about the law, so what laws allow companies to get away with this kind of stuff, but also how does the law go after people versus companies differently. And for chapter 4, talking about resulting inequality that we see in society as a result, And then as a last little touch point, asking visitors to vote with the time cards that they signed in with at the beginning. So this is a shot from the entry of the exhibition. You'll see on the right wall, there's like a big statement in vinyl that says, if you're not making 7.9% more this year, they're actually paying you less. And this was visible from the street, and I really wanted it to like draw people in as like a provocative statement that even though a lot of this exhibition is about the lowest waged workers, that these are issues that concern all of us and really gets you to think, am I being taken advantage of in some sense? In some sense, is inflation playing a role in how much I'm getting paid? So for the first interaction, there's a little video. So despite being kind of like a fun way to get people engaged with the exhibition, I think it was really important for me to have people put themselves in the shoes of somebody starting a work day. So realizing, okay, from now on, your time is not your own and it's being valued by somebody else. So it's a part of your day that's not fully in your control. So the first piece was a series of wall clocks. I kind of wanted the presentation to be like a little dystopian. Things aren't how they should be. Time isn't moving as it should. And I'll get into each one separately. So the first clock is the time and a half clock, which talks about overtime laws in the US. So most workers, if you work over 40 hours a week, you're entitled to overtime compensation. So any time that's worked over that, you make 1.5 times your hourly rate. But a lot of times that isn't paid out. So this clock is out of 8 hours instead of 12, because is time moving more slowly? It kind of feels like it when you're working time and a half to make up for lost wages, essentially. And if you think about it, it's out of 12, 1.5 times 8 is 12, and so you're losing about 4 hours for every 12. So the next one talks about the minimum wage and minimum wage violations. So I was thinking about this one more as like a pie chart. So who's most likely to experience a minimum wage violation? So based on the intersection of race, gender, and legal status, undocumented Latinx women are 4 times more likely to experience a minimum wage violation than perhaps a documented white male in the workforce. So the likelihood of the second hand being either in the red or the white represents that difference. So stop the clock is about rest breaks and meal breaks. So if you work more than 6 hours in a day, you're entitled to take meal and rest breaks, which are unpaid, but you're still supposed to take them. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that if you don't take them, you are entitled to 1 hour of compensation for each break that you miss. So this clock kind of shows from 9 to 6, do you feel like you could go a whole day without taking a break? And also, if you do miss those breaks, what are you entitled to as a worker? And this last one is called off the clock, talking about off the clock work, which is when maybe a manager asks you to come in early or stay late before the technical workday starts. And so there's actually no record of you working, and so you aren't being compensated for that time, which is why there aren't any numbers on this clock. So next, this is a second piece that's building off of the minimum wage violation form of wage theft. So this is talking about how people who suffer minimum wage violations on average lose about $64 a week. And that might not seem like a lot, but I wanted to put that into the scale of a year. What does that look like in terms of 12 months of paychecks? And so these were positioned on a table, and they were filled out. So the green ones were the $11.60 that a minimum wage, somebody making minimum wage would earn every month. But if they were experiencing minimum wage violations, they would be missing out on 3 paychecks out of the year, which is the difference between being above or below the poverty line. So that's where that dotted line comes in. Okay, next, talking about the minimum wage. This piece had a sort of parallel visualization. The first, more traditional, talking about the change in the real value of the minimum wage since 1968, and then also a more immediate representation of that in terms of like the actual buying power of a day's work. So in 1968, a day's work was valued at about $105, which is what pretty much what could buy you that whole supermarket shopping basket. Versus in 2009, which would be about $80 today, and then today, which is about $58. So there's like a really visual, visceral shift in the buying power of the minimum wage, and I think it can often get lost when we do traditional bar graphs, line charts, things like that, and so I really wanted, I really wanted to appeal to like what people do every day when it comes to filling their refrigerators and like very clearly relating it to like everyday choices. This is a little bit of a zoom in. So focusing on 1968, which is the highest in terms of like adjusted for inflation that the minimum wage has ever been. And then in 2009 was the last time it was increased, which was to $7.25. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $10. And then today it remains at $7.25. And I think it's pretty comparable to the recent minimum wage increase here. But I think in doing this, I was arguing that just because something is federally mandated, is lawful, does not mean that it's still not theft, because company profits are skyrocketing, and it seems like the only thing that's not catching up is what we value low-wage work at. Okay, so next, talking about the law. This is the best photo I had, apologies. So on the glass is talking about forced arbitration, which is a clause that a lot of companies include in employment contracts that basically prevent their employees from suing them in the future. So it's a huge loophole that allows them to basically abuse their workforce and not face any penalties for it. And of the employees that pursued their claims in arbitration, only 1.6% won their case. And then on the other side, there's a question. It says the same amount of money was stolen via property crime and minimum wage theft in 2019. That's me going like this. Similar crimes. So how come the law treats these so differently? Here's a little zoom in. This is an hourglass. I'm realizing now that I forgot to mention that a big part of this exhibit is talking about time, because I think when we talk about economics, a lot of the times people like turn off their brain a little bit, and I was thinking, what's a very like immediate way that I can talk about this data without talking about money, GDP, inflation? And I think the thing that made the most sense was talking about time, because for people who experience, for low-wage workers who experience wage theft, like their bottom line doesn't change just because they're making less than they should. They're working longer hours to compensate for those lost wages. So it's essentially their time that's being exploited, which is why there were clocks and there was a graph about time and now this hourglass. So just clearing that up. But here we have an hourglass talking about how many people are doing time for theft versus companies doing time for theft. And I realize that companies can't physically do time for theft, but this is talking more about the double standard in how we prosecute theft. And that, according to the FBI, there's 193,000 people in prison for theft. And companies, when they do face litigation for wage theft, the fines are often way less than the money that they've stolen. So lastly, talking about inequality and self-determination, this is an infographic I made. It says, in 2020, the year of COVID, the ratio of CEO to typical worker compensation was 351 to 1. And that little yellow square in the bottom right is that 1 versus the whole square being 351. So I think whereas like the last piece was, how does this happen? How do we allow this to happen? This is kind of more, where is this money going? And I think we've all heard that, you know, there's a 1%, but I think we also tune that out a little bit because we hear it so often. So seeing this representation of like how big the difference really is, I think is really important, because the people making 351 times, I think, have a lot more agency in determining what their time is worth versus the people making the average salaries really have no power when it comes to determining what their time is worth. And this was paired with like a final question asking visitors to vote with their time cards. So do you feel like you are paid what your time is worth? Yes, I do, or no, I don't. Got 5 votes for yes and 35 for no. So before all of this, created a communication campaign to advertise this exhibition. I created a poster that I posted around Mutual Gallery, which is where the exhibition was, and around El Born. And it says, "We value your time," with a little disclaimer, at $7.25 an hour. So this was kind of like a teaser trying to get people interested in what this exhibition might be about, and kind of drawing on that collective frustration that we're not making what we should, who's determining what we make and why. And I think this kind of, it attracts people because it's like they are the employers and we are the ones doing the legwork of generating their profits. So I think it creates a kind of sense of community that wants you to like join along. And I also created this little quick video to share online, just getting the word out about where it was, what day and what time. And thank you very much, DDS, for sharing on your socials. All right, so in retrospect, it feels like this exhibition was like just yesterday, but I feel like I've gotten some distance to like think about the execution and the reception. So there are things that I think could have gone better. So I really tried to create a very wide net in terms of the kinds of issues that I wanted to talk about. And I think in doing that, I might have overlooked maybe some firsthand accounts or case studies that could have really bolstered, you know, the effectiveness of my arguments and the credibility of the work. I think this is a little bit more trivial, but like directing visitors to and through the exhibition, there were 2 entrances. There was one from the rest of the gallery that was like covered by a curtain, and the way that the narrative structure of the exhibition was laid out, it was like very important to go from the beginning, and I think some people were coming in from the back, and so I wasn't able to control how people were viewing it as well as I could have. So I think maybe some signage or something by the curtain saying, hey, go around, would have been very beneficial. And I think the last thing, what are the next steps? I basically unloaded a very heavy topic, and I feel like maybe I could have done more to have some sort of call to action, maybe give somebody a little more of a propeller into maybe action, than instead of just talking about all the terrible things that are happening for labor rights. But there were things that went really well as well. So I think it was really great to have comparisons that I think everybody could relate to. So I think everybody has at some point sat at a desk and looked at a clock and thought, oh, how am I still here? Or is my time really worth this? We've all, I think, gone to the supermarket and thought, wow, I used to be able to buy 4 bags of groceries and now I could only buy 3 with 50 euros. So I think that really helped get the message across in a way that might have been lost if there were just graphs on the wall. Another thing that I think went well is that I moved away from impartiality in my midterm presentation. I got some feedback that was like, well, I don't know if everybody's going to agree with you on this. I would consider maybe toning it down a little bit, especially in terms of like the minimum wage isn't enough. But I didn't listen to any of that because I feel like the point of an exhibition is to maybe convince somebody that doesn't agree with you of like what you believe in, and I think it was a strong point in the end. And lastly, I think the visitor interactions really added a lot to the exhibit. I think it gives you a little skin in the game and you feel a lot more involved in the topic and in maybe identifying where you fit within the problem or how maybe you might change your situation as a result. All right, that's it. Thank you.